The Temple Institute presents Parashat Hashavua, the weekly Torah teaching by Rabbi Chaim Richman.
Shalom. This week we are reading Parashat Tetzaveh. Actually begins in the 20th verse of chapter 27 in the book of Exodus and continues through to the 10th verse of the 30th chapter here in Sefer Shemot. But as soon as chapter 28 begins, we are introduced to the very fascinating concept of the garments of Aaron and his children, the special bigdei kahuna, priestly vestments, continuing with our theme here of the tabernacle, soon to become the holy temple. The kohanim, all the descendants of Aharon, must be wearing special garments when they engaged in the divine service. This is a special command from God. We read in these verses together now. Now you bring near to yourself Aaron your brother and his sons with him from among the children of Israel. Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, Elazar, and Itamar, the sons of Aaron, to minister to me. You shall make vestments of sanctity for Aaron your brother, for glory and splendor. You shall speak to all the wise-hearted people whom I have invested with the spirit of wisdom, and they shall make the vestments of Aaron to sanctify him, to minister to me. So we see that these garments are a requirement for the kohanim, the priests, to be ministering before Hashem, to be attending to the aspects of the divine service. And they are called garments for glory and splendor. These are the vestments that they shall make: a breastplate, an ephod, a robe, a tunic of box-like knit, a turban, and a sash. They shall make vestments of sanctity for Aaron your brother and his sons to minister to me. They shall take the gold, the turquoise, purple, and scarlet wool, and the linen. And of course, the next verses begin to describe to us in great detail the materials and the description of these garments. And this is really such an amazing concept, the priestly garments. And it can be interpreted on so many different levels. You know, God here is so specific about these colors, about the appearance of the garments, and we can explain it on so many different levels because, like any other great mystery of Torah, certainly the truth exists on many levels, and we can imagine that there are vast spiritual rectifications that correspond with the upper worlds that are significant here, that are a factor in the actions of these men that are performing their sacred duty in this sacred space of the Holy Temple. And we already know that the colors, for example, so unique, so unusual that are described here, are obviously related to the original garments of Adam Harishon, of the first man in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, just as we already know that the kohanim, especially the high priest who is attending to the sacred service in the Holy Temple, is affecting various aspects of a rectification for Adam Harishon, for the first man, and really for all men. But you know that whenever we have concepts in the Torah, as they exist on many levels, and we can interpret them according to all sorts of vast cosmic secrets, there is also a simple explanation. There are many levels of understanding. So we want to understand really what's going on with this most unusual part of the Torah. Specific instructions, so specific about how the Kohanim must appear while they are attending to their sacred service. And again, we know everything going on in the temple is so significant. This is a sacred space, and maybe even more specifically, we can call it a controlled environment. In a way, it's kind of like a perfect world, or at least an image of a perfect world of how God would like things to be done. It's like a microcosm that from there things flow out and kind of bring about a certain alignment for the whole world. And I actually like to look at this as with a certain analogy. And it's the whole concept of the love affair between God and Israel. It's like a husband who says to his wife, you know, I really like how you look in that dress. And so also Hashem is telling the Kohanim that while they are in this sacred space and attending to this service which is elevating the whole world, I want you to look a certain way for whatever reasons he has in mind. But I want to share with you a few amazing points about this whole mystery. One is that we have a concept, it's reflected in the literature of our sages, that these garments possess an intrinsic holiness. Indeed, the Kohanim only retain their official status while they are wearing the garments. They are not allowed to perform their sacred duties in the temple in civilian clothes, even though they are of lineal descent and they are by right and by law obligated and privileged to attend to the service in the temple. No, they must be wearing their garments to the extent that the expression of our sages is that when they're wearing the garments, they're called kohanim. They're not wearing the garments, they're not called kohanim. And then another point I think that's even more amazing is this idea that is taught in the Midrash in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the great Rabbi Yochanan, teaches us in the Midrash that there is a concept that just as the offerings in the Holy Temple bring about a certain state of atonement, so also the garments that are upon the bodies of the Kohanim, especially the Kohen Gadol, bring about atonement. And that's the expression. Just as the offerings bring about atonement, so too the garments effect an atonement. Of course, what does that mean, kapara? What is atonement? I think the best way to look at it is that it brings about a certain realignment of things that were lost, of ideas that were confused, of energies that were wasted. It brings about a certain kind of spiritual alignment. But the details of this teaching are very fascinating. Basically, Rabbi Yochanan says, just as the offerings bring about atonement, so too the garments. And then, in a very complex piece of Torah erudition, he explains, based on certain verses that we'll just skip for now, each verse, how he derives that from each particular verse, that every single one, every single particular aspect of these garments brings about atonement for a different area of human failing, for a different type of fallibility. And the examples are, for example, the choshen, the breastplate, brings about an atonement for mistaken judgment, actually for misguided, for purposely misguided judgment. And the ephod brings about an atonement for idolatry. The me'il, the robe, brings about an atonement for those who speak idle speech, gossip, lashon hara, evil talk. The ketonet, the tunic, brings about an atonement for murder, God forbid. The pants bring about an atonement for sexual immorality. The hat, an atonement for haughtiness. And the tzitz, the gold front plate of the high priest, brings about an atonement for brazenness. This is, of course, a very unusual and remarkable thought, but again, on a simple level, what does it really mean? I think, again, if we define kapara, atonement, as an idea that we have a chance, through select actions, through proper kavanah, through proper intent, and through proper, desire to behave properly, we have a chance to fix things that we've damaged. We have a chance to bring about a renewal of spiritual force and energy, a realignment. So what does this really mean when it comes to the high priest wearing these garments? Don't forget that the Kohen Gadol in the Holy Temple is like a wick that draws up the oil. He is bringing down the shefa, the sustenance, the divine blessing into the world through everything that he does. There's a very interesting law regarding that elusive topic. The Torah speaks about the Ir Miklat, the city of refuge. When a person inadvertently kills someone, he's allowed to run and flee to the city of refuge, and there he's safe. And as soon as the reigning Kohen Gadol, the present high priest, as soon as he passes away, then that person is free to go and live a normal life. Somehow, this person in the Ir Miklat, in the city of refuge, is inexorably bound up with the high priest of that generation. And the watershed event for all of those people to leave those cities of refuge is the death of the current high priest. And why is that? Sages explain because the high priest is basically responsible for the whole world. He is responsible for the spiritual balance of the whole world. It's through his prayers and his service in the temple and his activity that the world can come to a certain state of balance and peace and tranquility. And if things happen that are out of sync, if this inadvertent killing took place, it's the high priest's fault. Something is wrong here. So he is inexorably bound up with the fate of that individual. And so, when we look at it that way, the idea really is that this person is looking at himself also, should be looking at himself, that he is every man. He is bringing about, as best as possible, a tikkun for all people through everything that he does in the temple, just like everything else that goes on there in that sacred space affects the whole world. The Kohen Gadol is to affect all people. And what I want to know is, what does it mean that his garments bring about a state of atonement for all of these various human failings that are experienced by all humanity. I think it's very simple when we think about it in the context of the relationship between the reigning high priest and all of those unfortunates in the Ir Miklat. Basically, he's looking at himself, he looks at his garments, he looks down, he looks at the pants, he looks at the tunic, the robe, and he realizes this teaching, how everything corresponds to an area of human activity, and he looks at himself as all people. And he says, look at my limbs, look at my life. How have I been using this energy? What is it all for? Where is it going? And through his taking full responsibility for himself as every man, as a microcosm of humanity, and through his sacred service and prayer, through this, again, the Torah always emphasizes to us that we must take responsibility. So through his inclusive introspection, how he's taking responsibility for all people, basically he's making an example of himself. And it goes on along with this theme of everything that goes on in the Holy Temple as being the hope, the aspiration for a model world. And may it be soon and in our time.
The Temple Institute's weekly Torah teaching is produced and copyrighted by the Temple Institute. These teachings are available on universaltorah.com in audio and video format. To learn more about the Temple Institute, please visit templeinstitute.org.